So, American Horror Story looks awful now, like on every single front imaginable. It has seriously plummeted in quality in the last like 6 to 7 years as an attempt to try and cut costs and save the studio big bucks. I may be just another guy on the internet yelling into the void, shouting about stuff that people don't really care about. I know I might sound a little bit pretentious throughout this video on multiple occasions, but this is something that I very much care about and I'm very passionate about, and so that's why I'm making this video. And when better to make this video than on the 13th anniversary of the show's first episode? It seems like the majority of people don't really seem to have a preference about how their favorite movies and television shows look. There's nothing wrong with liking TV shows that have a more grounded, focused, reality-based visual style. However, it becomes very upsetting to me when an iconic piece of media like American Horror Story loses its signature look throughout the years. And not only loses that look, but takes a complete nosedive into mediocrity. Cinematography, lighting, color palette, and overall aesthetics are just as important to storytelling as a script, a director, and the acting. It also just so happens that keeping the right people hired in order to achieve nice and pleasing to look at visuals, if that's a sentence I can say, is very expensive. The first 5 seasons of American Horror Story had such an innovative and creative take on horror television. Over the years, as the show lost popularity, FX opted to cut costs on basically all fronts. The writing, casting, episode lengths, as well as total number of episodes per season plummeted with each following season. And above all else, the show's iconic visual style were all sacrificed in their effort to cut costs. The cast had been reduced from A-list actors known for their long list of awards, both on screen and stage, to lesser-known, unawarded actors taking the lead starting around the turn of the decade. Actors like six-time Academy Award nominee Jessica Lange, 2003 Golden Globe winner for Best Actress Frances Conroy, and the eventual winner of the 2016 Emmy, Golden Globe, and SAG Award for Best Actress in a Mini-Series respectively, Sarah Paulson, all used to run this show. Now it's a group of Nepo babies and ex-Disney acts like Kaya Gerber, Bella Thorne, Emma Roberts, Billy Lord, and Kim Kardashian. Not all of those are bad per se, but most of these stunt casts like Gus Kentworthy and Kim Kardashian don't work because they're not actors who have trained for years to perfect their craft like the 3 actresses I mentioned before. All of this stunt casting started with the huge success that was Lady Gaga in Hotel. The show had made a decent recovery from the news that Jessica Lange and Frances Conroy weren't going to be participating in Hotel. However, these stunt castings over the years have gotten completely ridiculous and out of hand, and it didn't really become a huge problem until the early 2020s. In Death Valley, the second half of the double feature season, which is widely regarded as the worst season, would see a whole slew of unrecognizable and fairly inexperienced actors take the helm from the stellar cast of the first 6 episodes. My friend and longtime American Horror Story content creator here on YouTube, Skyler Gaetano, has a 3-part series on the Death of American Horror Story, where he examines the changes in the writing, casting, and directing throughout the years, and kind of tries to pinpoint when the show kind of started to go downhill from a creative standpoint. If you're interested in seeing the video, I have linked all 3 of them down below, so please go down and make sure you watch all 3 videos and subscribe to Skyler because he's been making content for years about American Horror Story. Maybe you'll see something of his later on in this video. Aside from the most frustrating change, that being the downfall of the cast, the writing and visuals suffered immensely as the show reached its 6th, 7th, and 8th years. By its 10th anniversary, the show had basically lost all of its originality and had basically conformed to the look and feel of most other series you'd find on Netflix. You may be wondering why I'm even making a video on this topic since I'm just one person and it's just my opinion. And at this point, wasting time talking about American Horror Story in 2024 as if it's even in a serious conversation anymore when most people have moved on is like kind of stupid. And to that I'll say, I'm extremely hyperfixated on the decline in not only popularity of the show, but also the creative decline in the show when it comes to how the show looks and how the show is presented to us. During my first watch through of the first 7 seasons, yes, I came into the fandom late. We're not going to talk about it. I was 13. I could never quite put my finger on what it was about season 6 and 7 that I didn't really like that much. I liked the stories and some of the characters, even though the cast had started to slim down at this point. But there was just something so special about those first 5 seasons that clearly had not carried over to the most recent 2. I watched Apocalypse live, and while I enjoyed some aspects like returning faces such as Frances Conroy, Lily Rabe, Kathy Bates, and most shockingly Jessica Lange, there was just something about it that I was like, I don't know what's wrong. There's something here that I feel is different still from the first 5 seasons. As a 14-year-old, I couldn't really put my finger on it until I stumbled upon a Reddit post from the user at Chuggalo stating, "I swear, I love AHS, but I'm telling you, it's yellow." Attached was a side-by-side comparison of 2 scenes, one from 2014's Freak Show and the other from 2017's Cult. As soon as I saw this image, I felt an immediate feeling of relief that I was not the only person to notice that there was something off with the show visually. The thing that had suddenly changed the visuals in between 2015 and 2016, the thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on but so badly wanted to point out, is that American Horror Story had switched from film cameras to digital cameras. This led me down a rabbit hole, and I can't exactly remember when this was. I think it was at some point in between Apocalypse and 1984. I was one of those people in high school that was like super into like indie films, and if they weren't shot on film, then it was a huge problem for me. And you know, that film camera elitist in me is still a thing, but I would say it's calmed down a little bit because you can film stuff on digital and it can still look gorgeous. But to me, it's just always going to look better on film. Anyway, when 1984 came out, I was still just so upset about how it looked because it was the first season I had watched live that I could actually point out my frustrations that I had with the visuals and say, hey, look there, that's the thing I don't like. From that point forward, I had watched the show a few times and had started to become a bit obsessed with how the old era looked versus how the new era looked. Once you explain this change to an AHS fan, you can literally see the light bulb go off in their head where they realize that the decline in the show's popularity also goes hand in hand with the casting, directing, writing, and the visuals. A show like American Horror Story does not deserve to look like this, in my opinion, when it used to look like this. I have never seen a show fall so far in quality when it comes to the way it looks. The show used to have such style, it brought us very unique and fun visuals and sets and costumes. After 2016, the creators seemed to genuinely stop caring about the show's visuals and the creativity around the show as they started to focus on other miniseries such as American Crime Story and their hits over at Netflix like Ratchet and Dahmer. If you look at all the problems with American Horror Story starting in Roanoke talking about visuals, 99 of those problems can be traced back to 2 things. Number 1, the show's legendary cinematographer Michael Goy left the show, taking with him the best stylistic approach the show has seen to this day. And number 2, the show stopped using film cameras, instead opting for the cheaper option of digital. I get that they had to shrink the show's budget because a large number of the cast members were leaving and the ratings had begun to decline, but that doesn't mean that I had to like it. The cinematography, the art direction, the color grading, the costumes, the sets, literally everything imaginable just went down like the Titanic. But those aren't the only things that suffered in 2016, because starting in 2016, the episodes went from an average of almost an hour an episode to just 40 minutes an episode, with the most recent seasons like NYC and Delicate even reaching a new low of 31 minutes long. It seems as if after Hotel, everyone working on the show in literally every single department had gone creatively bankrupt. I mean, the fact that the episodes now in the last 3 or 4 seasons are half the length that they normally should be, and there used to be 13 episodes every single season, and now we're down to just 10 or even 9 in some cases. It just shows that they don't have enough story there to fit into 13 episodes anymore. And I'm also not saying that short seasons can't be good. 1984 was genuinely pretty good. Like, I don't have many complaints about 1984, but I just miss the grandiose feeling of those first 5 seasons so much. Think about all the changes that happened starting in 2016. The episode count went down, the visuals were completely altered to fit a mold, half of the cast left and slowly transitioned out through seasons 6, 7, and 8. A lot of the writers left, a lot of the directors left, everything changed between 2016 and 2018. Another thing that was kind of affected by this were the themes of every season started to feel a bit messy and less coherent as each season came about. And don't even get me started on the locations and the set design. Okay, fine, I'll talk about it. They were no longer focused on centering their stories in ordinary locations like a house, a hotel, a freak show, but were more concerned with their plots. For example, in the Roanoke season, the plot doesn't revolve around the Big Shaker Mansion. It revolves around a TV show titled My Roanoke Nightmare. To be completely honest with you, this subversion works here in Roanoke to an extent, but every other season that tries to focus on a thing rather than a location or a group of people within said location kind of falls short a little bit in my opinion. Take Apocalypse, for example. That season has no primary location besides maybe the Warlock School, and even the school is such an afterthought, and it simply serves as a place for the survivors of the apocalypse to escape to. There's no centuries-long lore or mysteries to be uncovered within the building when compared to Miss Robichaux's academy in the season Coven, and also just New Orleans as a location in general. The School for the Witches is at the center of the plot for every single character. The audience is shown literally so many flashbacks that clue us into the history of the Coven and the school. What would the season be without the flashbacks to Fiona's past with Myrtle, the Axeman side plot, the war between the witches and the voodoo practitioners, and for God's sakes, the Test of the Seven Wonders? All of this is tied to the location in which the season is so beautifully set in. Beyond story reasons, the new location just don't look as good either. Production quality as a whole has just been so mid since Roanoke. The Roanoke house is gorgeous, and I wouldn't change anything about it, but these suburban houses in Cult, I don't know. I mean, I guess they are fine for that season because it's directly related to the plot, and Cult is very plot heavy. Would I ever prefer that over this gorgeous school from Coven, the freak show set, the asylum, the murder house, the goddamn hotel? No, but that's fine. The suburbs can be interesting on their own, I suppose, but it's still just not as grand and unique as I would like it to be because it just fits into the mold of what every other show on television looks like. If you didn't know that this was American Horror Story and I removed every single actor from this scene, would you be able to tell it was? How about now? Okay, what about now? See my point? In Apocalypse, the school is cool to look at on the inside, but they didn't even bother to build anything interesting on the outside. It's just a weird spiral in the middle of the desert that looks like a sad millennial modern art piece, and I absolutely hate it. Like, where is the maximalism? Where's the class? Hotel gets this, and Apocalypse gets this. Another side note on Apocalypse, they actually did return to a few locations from other seasons, like the hotel from Hotel, and more notably, the murder house from Murder House. And I gotta say, there is no magic here. No intrigue for me. I feel absolutely nothing looking at this set versus this one. These knockoff hotel sets are just so dull. Like, look at how alive and real this scene looks from Hotel. Even though it's a really trashy room, the sets have so much detail in them. And in the Apocalypse revamp, it's almost as if somebody found half of the original props and just called it a day. The hotel lobby is also not revisited at all, which is just so disappointing to me because that set is top 3 of the entire show. Instead, they have Cordelia walk in the door and never show her going in any further. They use the murder house a lot better in this episode, but I still feel like the visuals are just not as good as they were in Murder House. Sarah Paulson actually directed this episode, and in mine and most other people's opinion, it's the best episode of the season. Her vision was excellent, and while I'll be critical critical of the way in which it looks, the set is fully realized, and the actors are doing a great job. There aren't any missing props or redone rooms or anything, which I have to applaud the crew for. The majority of the issues here are the digital cameras and the fact that the color grading doesn't quite match Murder Houses. As far as 1984 and NYC go, though, I do enjoy a lot of the sets that are included in those seasons. I like the fact that 1984 is almost entirely set in the campground. However, it's not used to its full potential. It's just a blatant copy of Murder House and Hotel. In NYC, we have the luxury of seeing the grimiest parts of the city, which I really like. That actually adds a lot of character to this season. I loved that it was filmed on location, like Coven was in New Orleans and Red Tide was in Provincetown. I love the bathhouses and the bars that we visit quite often throughout the season. Mostly I have no complaints about the locations and sets used in NYC because they look real. They look lived in. Double feature and Delicate, though? Absolutely not. Ignoring Red Tide here because the house there is fine, Provincetown is fine, I don't have any complaints about the location, but in Death Valley, the second part of the season, the sets all look like this, or this, or this. It seems as if there was no thought put into any of them, and it's so disappointing to me. It's almost like they want it to look super duper cheap. And they do the same thing in Delicate. I cannot point to a single thing in this room that I think sticks out in a good way. It's all just millennial gray walls, ugly furniture, boring, gloomy lighting, and before you say anything, I'm aware that that is the point. But look at Asylum. That season is also very desaturated, but it looks gorgeous because it properly uses shadows and highlights to diversify the values on screen. Both of these shots have virtually no color, but look at how much more crisp the image is on the top versus the one on the bottom. Asylum showcases film's naturally high contrast and vibrant picture quality, whereas in Delicate, the image looks like they forgot to choose a LUT for it. The sets in Delicate are dreadful because it saves them money. The sets in Asylum are dreadful because it's an asylum. It's going to be dreadful. The set design and locations in Asylum are perfect. Not only for a practical use to be used as an asylum, but the location also serves as a visual representation of what all the characters are going through. Not a single character in an asylum is going to be happy. The sets and visuals reflect that. That's how you tell good visuals and set design from bad visuals and bad set design. Is the set being used just because it is? Or is it being used to further the story and the character development within each character? In Asylum, Briarcliff Manor revolves around everyone. Every character is either a patient there, or an orderly, or a nun, or a doctor. So the asylum literally houses all of them and is relevant to all of them. That is why the location matters and the set design matters, because all these characters are tied to the asylum. There's nothing like that in Delicate that ties every single character together. There's a reason for all of this change, as Mark Worthington, the longtime production designer of the show, left after 5 seasons. The production designer's job is to create a cohesive vision when it comes to things like costumes, sets, and props. After Mark Worthington left, longtime art director of the show, Andrew Murdoch, took over as the production designer for Roanoke, which explains why it still looks really good, because Andrew worked alongside Mark on previous seasons. From the house, the costumes, the props, everything still carries that maximalism that Mark Worthington was going for in the first 5 seasons. Jeffrey Mosa took over for the season of Cult as production designer, and if the name doesn't ring a bell, Mosa was also the production designer for The People vs. O.J. Simpson, which explains the generally very similar, realistic, and grounded look that both of them have. Mosa would go on to be the production designer on another Ryan Murphy show, 911, and has most recently done work on the 3rd season of Amazon Prime's hit show The Boys. There's definitely a pattern here. Mosa's production style seems to favor realistic and gritty true crime shows, and that is exactly why he was chosen for Cult, which borrowed elements from those kinds of shows. It explains why the sets here are so toned down from the first 6 seasons that featured grandiose and larger-than-life sets. In Apocalypse, Giles Masters took over as the production designer for 1 episode and then dipped before Valder Wilt finished the season. An important thing to note about Apocalypse is it's the first season where more than one production designer would carry the load for the season. In my opinion, this leads to an overall inconsistent and incohesive vision, which, yeah, we can see in seasons like Apocalypse, 1984, and so on. It explains why the new sets for Hotel and Coven feel so lifeless to me in Apocalypse. The constant changing of leadership and the rushed decisions to make deadlines is what killed the production design for American Horror Story. Chloe Arbicher took over for 1984, and like I said before, the season isn't as badly dressed as the other seasons are, but it still doesn't have the maximalism that I'm looking for. She worked on all 10 episodes of Death Valley as well. The sets in Red Tide, as I said before, are great, and I wouldn't really change much about them, but because the season was cut so short, I almost wonder if it could have been even better had they had a full season of Red Tide. Matthew Flood Ferguson would take over the mantle for the next installment, titled NYC. Looking at the man's other work, he's pretty consistently worked exclusively with Ryan Murphy on his other shows. He was production designer on 2020's limited series on Netflix titled Hollywood, and even pulled triple duty in 2022 working on Ryan Murphy productions such as Dahmer, The Watcher, and American Horror Story NYC simultaneously. This speaks to a larger problem with Ryan Murphy productions. I spoke a bit about the overworked and underpaid Manny Coto in my American Horror Stories episode 4 video. This man, I'm sure, is a decent writer when given the chance to actually take his time, but oh my god, he is single-handedly the reason why this franchise was so ass in 2021. Manny ended up being saddled with the middle 4 episodes of Stories, and then immediately jumped to the main series to co-write the final 6 episodes of Double Feature. And if you've seen Double Feature, it becomes clear here exactly why it was so terrible with the last 5 to 6 episodes. Brad Falchuk, this series co-creator, had writing credits on 9 of the 10 episodes in Double Feature. It used to be that each writer in a writer's room, or duo of writers, would write 1 or 2 episodes every season. But in seasons like Death Valley and NYC, the workload looks like this. In NYC, they even brought in Charlie Carver, the actor who played Adam on screen, to co-write 4 out of the 10 episodes. This would also be his only time writing for television. And then in Delicate, there's just one writer. No one else. Just Haley Pfeiffer. All of this is due to the show consolidating its crew and forcing inexperienced writers to take on multiple episodes a year because they don't want to pay experienced writers higher rates. The same thing is happening in departments such as production design, marketing, and yes, even the actors. Matthew Flood Ferguson did a great job on NYC, and I just want to applaud him and all of his work because despite being clearly overworked, doing 3 shows that all went into production in mid-2022, he did a great job on all 3 based on what I've seen from the others. Delicate, on the other hand, is done by Jamie Walker, who worked on The Assassination of Gianni Versace, Pose, and Ryan Murphy's film The Prom from 2020. I'm not going to shit on her because the really bland and minimalistic sets could be due to the fact that the 2023-2024 television season was one of the most unprecedented years in all of TV, as it saw 2 strikes occur from the spring to the early winter months, forcing most other departments to either rush their work to meet deadlines, or in the case of American Horror Story, just continue filming like there's nothing happening. Every aspect of Delicate was affected by the strikes. I'm not trying to deny that. I'm not sure if it would have been any better without the strikes, but what I do know for sure is that working on that set during that time must have been a really difficult thing, knowing that the rest of Hollywood is about to shut down and you don't know if you're going to be able to have a job for the next like 6 months. So I'll close this section of the video with this. If American Horror Story Season 13 is the last season, please, for the love of God, make it look good with its set design. I'm begging you. As I've stated many times throughout this video, American Horror Story once had amazing visuals that were masterfully crafted using film cameras. Once the switch to digital happened, the show's iconically cinematic look started to fade. Roanoke had some pretty decent cinematography, but it didn't really matter because they lost the perks of using film. However, using digital cameras actually kind of worked for Roanoke because it is about a TV show that would have most definitely used digital cameras, so I can't get too mad at that because that is a creative reason for opting to use digital. The decision to continue using film cameras for the next 6 installments, however, has no creative benefit. All of those seasons' visuals suffered as a result for this change. Some seasons, like Cult and Apocalypse, look especially dull. The creators seemed to have given up on giving each season its own look. Instead, they plaster this ugly yellow filter on almost every single scene. I'll get more into the coloring of every season when I talk about that in its own section, but it's important to note that along with the cinematography going to shit, so did the coloring. Roanoke's unique take on documentaries and found footage films is what sets the cinematography apart from the first 5 seasons and the last 6 seasons. The first 5 seasons all had the same cinematographer in Michael Goy, who has defended the show's necessity to continue using film cameras in order to attain that crisper, vintage look. And you know what? He was right, because as soon as the show happened to change it up and go for a more digital-focused look, the visuals of the show just completely fell off. Also, I'm sorry, I don't really have a source for this, but I do remember watching an interview with Goy a few years ago where he stated that back during like Freak Show or Hotel, FX wanted them to switch to digital cameras, and he very passionately defended the show's need to use film cameras for its very vintage, iconic style that the show had become known for at this point. I mean, the masterful camera work of the first 5 seasons lives rent-free in my head, so Goy was pretty much correct. Murder House on its own is pretty plain with its camera work compared to the later seasons. I'd say the choppy editing is what really comes to mind when I think of this season. It's kind of like how Glee was edited with all the jump cuts and double takes, but it's used here in less of a comedic way and more of a dramatic or horror-inducing way. Asylum uses techniques such as split diopter shots and Dutch angles to make the audience as uncomfortable and anxious as possible to convey how the patients at the asylum must have felt being stripped of their autonomy, dignity, and privacy. Studio Binder defines a split diopter lens as a piece of half-convex glass that affixes to the main lens of the camera. This makes half the lens nearsighted while the other half remains farsighted. This creates the illusion of a deep focus. This type of shot was used a lot in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s a little bit, but has waned in popularity, much like many other unique and stylistic choices in cinematography. Lots of indie horror and mid-budget films still use this technique to this day because of its unsettling nature. With the rise of psychological thrillers during the late 2010s, like Suspiria and Us, came a sort of resurgence for the lens, and it's being used in shows like Netflix's The Queen's Gambit in 2020 and Amazon Prime's Them. I'd like to think that American Horror Story was a small part in this resurgence, since they used it a ton in the first 5 seasons. Granted, the split diopter shot never really fully went away, but I can't think of too many TV shows that used it in the 90s or early 2000s. Asylum's use of religious imagery is not an accident either. Exhibit A. Exhibit B.
Help me.
And Exhibit C.
He's dead.
Sister.
All of this is used to elicit an emotional reaction from the audience, and it paints Asylum in the same light as cult horror films from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The fact that the season is set in the 60s and a lot of the shots look like they were pulled directly from one of those films from that time period is a testament to film's timeless, iconic look. Asylum was also the first season to use multiple cameras from different eras to achieve many different looks throughout its very long history. For the Auschwitz scenes with Anne Frank, the shots used are either hyper stylized to look like World War II documentary footage, or are quite literally achieved using cameras from that time. For the Anne Frank housewife scenes, they again used unconventional and out-of-date cameras to place the viewer in another time. The stylized camera also doubles as a metaphor for Anne Frank's perceived picturesque family once she's been lobotomized. It's easy to see why Goy earned an Emmy nomination for this episode. The first half of the episode opens up with a 3-minute one-take where Sister Jude meets with Nazi hunter Sam Goodman. The slow-moving camera closing in on the scene carefully reveals each new piece of information, which makes you feel like you're a fly on the wall witnessing an ultra-secretive meeting, which in this case you are. The way in which it is acted is also perfect. It speaks to Jessica and Mark's professionalism and dedication to their craft. At the end of the season, they use many different techniques to show the passage of time. Speaking with Vulture about American Horror Story's most iconic shots, Goy stated he shot Lana's documentary on 16mm film and had his post-production team transfer it to 3/4 U-matic videotape, an industrial format no longer used. That's what gives the film this like grimy off-color look that it has in this scene. There are an endless number of shots that I could talk about in Asylum that set the season apart from the rest of the seasons of the show. The third season, Coven, elevates the show's cinematography to new heights. As the amount of one-take scenes and monologues here, there's a lot of them, and this allows the brilliant actresses on our screen to flex their acting muscles harder than they possibly ever have before. Coven also seems to use a lot of fisheye lenses. By far my favorite shots from Coven are the Papa Legba contact scene with Fiona, which showcases this shot. This just looks like it took 50 tries to accomplish. Like, I would never be able to pull this off myself. I love the shot of Cordelia after she passes the test of the 7 wonders. The swirling camera movements feel like we're debris being thrusted up in the air by a rising phoenix. Coven also weirdly has a lot of Dutch angles during like interviews and conversations and conferences between the characters, and I'm not exactly sure why they made this creative choice, but if you notice, anytime there's like a sit-down scene with like an interview, there's at least 2 Dutch angles. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure why they made that decision, but it's cool nonetheless. Lastly, for Coven, I would love to talk about the Last Supper shot. This shot is iconic, okay? They try and replicate it in Apocalypse to no avail. It looks awful in Apocalypse, but here, this is a thing of beauty. This is an art piece right here. Where do I even start with Freak Show? It's much different from Asylum and Coven, as it uses the least amount of split diopters, Dutch angles, and fisheye lenses of the first 5 seasons. But oh my god, you guys, Michael Goy is still so creative. He doesn't use too many of those techniques. Just look at how he films the twins.
It's in there. Why is she being so nice to us? She wants something. Someone waits. And my intuition tells me it wasn't your dear departed mama. When we lived in Alabama, I saw her in Tin Pan Alley. Shut up. What's wrong with you? But you do remind one of Jean Arthur. Shared your X-ray reports with me. It says you have 2 hearts, but only one reproductive system. Complicated, no? Has anyone tasted your cherry pie? Oh, dear God, she's a psycho pervert. She's down to earth is all.
Their introduction has these split screen shots. It's a powerful visual that reveals how Bet and Dot's worldviews are different. Freak Show is also known for its very vibrant color palette, and when I talk about colors later on in the video, I will definitely have a full section about Freak Show because it's one of the most beautifully colored seasons of television that I've ever seen. In episode 7, Dot and Elsa exchange notes with each other, and there's this really fun visual that goes along with it of their heads floating in complete darkness. It's a really cool element that makes these exchanges feel so ominous and untrustworthy. It perfectly captures the lack of trust either one has in the other. Episode 10 has some phenomenal moments and scenes regarding Pepper's backstory and the flash forwards of her in Briarcliff. I love that they chose to film them as if they were filming Asylum again with the desaturated colors. Hotel has such a grand yet like grimy feel to its cinematography, and obviously the sets as well, which I talked about earlier in the video. The use of fisheye lenses is a reference to the peephole that is in almost every single hotel room door, which I think is just such a cool inclusion. Like, of course, bring back the fisheye lenses for Hotel. That just makes so much sense. There's not much else to say about Hotel's cinematography because I've literally already said it for other seasons. I love the use of different cameras when they're back in the 20s with James Patrick March. Let's get into the changes that started with Roanoke. The change from these fisheye lenses, split diopter shots, Dutch angles, and one-take scenes to very cost-effective, quickly made digital shots is what killed the cinematography of American Horror Story. Cult, Apocalypse, and 1984 especially have really unimaginative cinematography. Like, beyond color grading, beyond all of that, the camera work is just not that good in my opinion. In all 3 of those seasons, the camera work is so milquetoast and unoriginal and without purpose. I realize that the look of the seasons, like Roanoke, Cult, and Apocalypse, is highly dependent on their hyper-realistic nature, and I'm not saying that the visuals shouldn't reflect that, but Asylum also had a very real premise, and the visuals are nothing but simple. I just miss the very grandiose and unapologetic and oftentimes uncomfortable visuals that we were served in the first 5 seasons. After Roanoke, it seemed like they just stopped caring as much about these grandiose visuals. I don't know if I'm alone in this boat, but I've seen a few Reddit posts and comments on my own YouTube videos about the cinematography, but it seems like no one has made an actual deep dive into the problem itself, until today, of course. Once Michael Goy left, he took all of his brilliance with him. Gavin Kelly was the cinematographer for Roanoke, Cult, Apocalypse, and 1984, and I'm not saying those visuals are bad on their own. I'm sure that if the first 5 seasons didn't exist and I didn't have a pre-existing bias towards those visuals, I would not have a single problem with this man's visual style, but because those previous visuals do exist, I immediately dislike everything about Gavin's seasons, and I'm not saying he doesn't have a very distinct visual style. His style is just different from Michael Goy's, and I just happen to prefer the vintage, unique look that Michael Goy brought with his visuals. There's nothing wrong with digital cameras and more realistic looking shots and sets and locations and costumes, but for a show like American Horror Story, which had already laid the groundwork in 5 visually gorgeous seasons for heightened cinematography, it's just not the same when you change it up so drastically to fit into a mold. Once Gavin Kelly left after 1984, I had a little bit of hope for the show's cinematography, as it was an opportunity for the show to yet again reinvent itself, or perhaps maybe even go back to the old style that I missed so much. The next cinematographer after Gavin Kelly was Andrew Mitchell, who did all 10 episodes of Double Feature before dipping from the franchise, and I have to say I definitely prefer his visual style to Gavin Kelly's. The first half of Double Feature is really beautiful to look at in my opinion. It's a little too desaturated, but we'll talk about that more when I talk about color. It doesn't have any of the neat tricks or interesting techniques like the first 5 seasons had, such as the split diopter shots, the Dutch angles, and the fisheye lenses, but it does have a unique shot composition. I walked away from Red Tide a little bit disappointed story and character-wise, but I wasn't disappointed by the visuals. I think they really did take their time to craft a very cohesive image and look for the season, especially when it came to the editing. The editing and the cinematography and some of the sets were really good. Everything about the pace was also really slowed down, which I really like. I like seasons like Hotel and Coven and Freak Show that really take their time with their story, if they even have one. And Red Tide was was kind of like a return to that. Around this time, Disney bought 20th Century Fox, which heavily changed the show's production quality, either for the better or for the worse, depending on the season and the cinematographer. Death Valley, compared to Red Tide, just doesn't have as many cool and interesting shots and locations to draw from. I mean, almost the entire season takes place in a completely white room, exposing a lack of creative camera work. There's also the fact that Death Valley is just a bad season on its own, with the writing, directing, and acting all coming off as a bit too cartoonish for its own good. I'm totally fine with the flashback portions of the episodes being in black and white. However, they just placed a black and white filter over digitally shot scenes, which is again pretty cheap looking. There are some shots that come across as decent though, so I'll give it that, but I really wish they would have used actual film cameras, as it would have taken the viewer back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like Asylum did. Instead, we have this plastic, dull, digital version of black and white, which takes me out of the era that it's supposed to be set in. NYC is the first season since Roanoke that I've actually really enjoyed the visuals for, almost to the point where I have absolutely no notes for the season. I would say though, wouldn't it just be easier to use film cameras if you were just gonna throw a film grain filter on, turn up the saturation, and turn down the exposure? It's definitely a good way to make digital scenes kind of mimic the look of film, but at that point, why not just use film cameras? Like, I know it's expensive, but if that's the look that you want, why aren't we just using the method that we used in the first 5 seasons? I just don't understand. I don't get it. I'm not saying the season looks bad. The season looks great. Okay, it looks like film, but it isn't film. I can't really complain too much about NYC's visuals because it has a unique look that sets it apart from every other season, such as in the Bad Fortune episode, there are some cool shots that kind of bring me back to the old AHS. There's a mystique here that is missing from some of the more straightforward and realistic looking seasons like Holt and Apocalypse. This is what the show is missing. Is it done the best here in NYC? No, but it's still an improvement over shots like this. Finally, we've come to the latest season of American Horror Story titled Delicate. Where do I even start with this season? There's so many things about this season that are just awful. The cinematography is bland, the colors are bland, the lighting is horrid, the visuals don't serve to elevate the performances or character moments or anything like that. American Horror Story has become so unrecognizable in its visual style. Go back to seasons like Asylum, Coven, Freak Show, and notice how the visuals truly served the story, the era in which the season was set in, the subject matter, the character moments in any given scene. None of that is present in current day American Horror Story. This seriously looks like a bad Netflix horror film instead of the American Horror Story that we all know and love. Here's a comparison of scenes that have similar subject matter in them, and I want you to look at the visuals and genuinely look and see which one is most effective at portraying what needs to be portrayed based on the subject matter that they're talking about.
This house.
This house is trying to help, and right now you are in no position to refuse. Who are all these people?
Who are these people? It's okay, baby. They're here to help. Remember your breathing. Breathe, remember your breathing. One more push.
One more big push.
Here she comes. Come on, push. Come on, honey, push. Come on.
I never wanted to lose you.
You never will.
He's a healthy baby girl.
Oh my God.
Violent.
The baby is stillborn.
You've got another one. Come here.
You're doing great, Viv.
God, it's ripping me apart.
We can be happy, honey, just like we were before.
Let go.
I don't think I have a choice.
We can still be happy.
The baby's coming. Someone! Shut the fuck up! Do something!
Delicate's cinematography is just as simplistic as its costumes, its set design, its locations, its acting, and its editing. And it really shows that they went for minimalism on all fronts. Another thing I have to say about Delicate is it kind of reminds me of 2017's Mother, the Darren Aronofsky film, which I actually enjoyed quite a lot. A lot of people don't like it, but I'm a defender. Okay, I'm a defender of Mother. The reason I bring it up is because there are a lot of close-ups on both of the female protagonists, and it's kind of like an ungodly, like uncomfortable amount of close-ups on the characters. They use this technique in Delicate to try and make us care about Anna, but it doesn't work because we don't know anything about her personality. The anxiety-inducing close-ups aren't done nearly as well as in Mother, and so therefore, I see it as a cheap copy. 99% of the time, we're so uncomfortably close to Anna, and no other characters get any sort of special camera work like this. They don't even try and do anything interesting with the witches in these bird costumes. They just show up on screen like normal people. There are no Dutch angles, or long takes, or fisheye lenses, or anything wacky and creative and weird. Just look at Fiona Good's introduction in Coven versus Siobhan's introduction in Delicate.
She's the equivalent of a human female in her late 80s. Her kidneys are failing. She's lost the ability to swallow. Several hours after this video was taken, we injected Allegra with our serum, RM47. Meet Allegra today.
I'll have what she's having.
Fiona's first close-up is built up for minutes as the audience hears what could possibly be her next big attempt at anti-aging. And then the following few scenes showcase her killing the man who pumped her full of anti-aging drugs. Siobhan gets none of this.
Then tell the Daniels to suck my clit. She's not missing a press day for a fucking commercial shoot.
It's exhausting being better than everyone. Your fans will send more updated photos the more you work.
Dee Dee never made me do stuff like this.
Dee Dee was a dinosaur, and that's why you fired her, and you moved over here to my company.
She's just a boring PR manager in a boring office surrounded by boring people until the last episode where she's in a boring costume in a now boring red and white layer surrounded by more boring people. I feel like I've proven my point here. The cinematography as a whole has been on a decline since Roanoke. And this video, if I kept going, would just be way too long. So I am going to move on now. Speaking of the length of this video, I knew it was going to be too much for me to handle everything in this video all on my own, so I decided to bring a friend along to talk about one of my favorite aspects of this show, at least an aspect of the show that I used to be really passionate about, and that would be Skyler, here to talk about the marketing campaigns, posters of every single season, and how it's been on a decline in the last few years.
American Horror Story is responsible for some of the most memorable posters and marketing campaigns in TV history, and this is largely due to a common theme of these posters being a mixture of eye-catching, scary, and high concept. When I say high concept, I mean that these images are visually striking, but at the end of the day they are easy to understand, which results in many of the AHS posters becoming recognizable icons for the franchise. And just like in other areas of AHS, while there are some iconic posters and marketing campaigns that really hit it out of the park, there are also some that completely miss the mark. Starting with the posters for Murder House, the show is off to a memorable start, as the season's key poster clued viewers in on the season's pregnancy horror angle, as well as introducing them to the Rubber Man, a character who remains a visual staple to the show to this day. The season also started the tradition of the cast poster, which only the first 5 seasons actually did. While the red and black posters with strong contrast are definitely iconic, if I were to choose a personal favorite poster from season 1, it would have to be this cast poster. The following year, Asylum continued the tradition of images with very strong contrast, as the season's key art features a ghostly white nun crying tears of black from her similarly black eyes. Compared to the previous season, this poster is much simpler simpler, at least when it comes to staging, yet it is way more effective without being overly referential to any specific characters. Additional Asylum posters are less strong in my opinion, but they build on the marketing campaign's emphasis on the season's religious aspects as well as the dark secrets that lie within Briarcliff. Asylum's cast poster is another banger, giving us a more in-depth look at the season's charcuterie board of twisted characters. My favorite poster from the season has got to be The Crying Nun, because it is just so impactful without being overly complex. Coven once again stepped up the marketing game, giving us yet another iconic key poster, this time featuring 3 women with a shared serpent tongue. Not only is this my favorite poster from Coven, but it is also my favorite poster from the entire franchise. Coven also had a less traditional cast poster featuring Jessica Lange's Fiona Good sitting in front of a fireplace with a handful of the season's characters levitating around her with their faces to the wall. So while we don't actually get to see the full cast of the season in the poster, it is still one of the most interesting posters they've ever released. A handful of posters were released for Freak Show, the most memorable of which being either this clown with its unhinged jaw or this lady with a dress in the shape of a big top circus tent. Freak Show's cast poster is also very strong, and it does a great job reflecting the season's 1950s time period. The Big Top Lady has got to be my favorite poster from Freak Show, but overall, I feel like this season's posters are starting to overcomplicate the formula a bit, as Coven and Asylum both prove that all you really need for a marketing campaign are eye-catching visuals with loose connections to the season. Hotel's key poster seems to be taking inspiration from a similar Freak Show poster, neither of which are my personal favorites, but Hotel has some additional posters that I do really love, like this one with the endless amounts of platinum hair pouring out of the Hotel Cortez elevator, which is even carried over into the season's cast poster. That cast poster would be the final one of AHS, and it is also my personal favorite poster from Hotel. As season 6's theme was intended to remain a secret until premiere night, the marketing campaign for Roanoke had a very unique goal: to misdirect. So a lot of promotional material was released for the season that at the end of the day has no connections to Roanoke, but in the midst of the nonsense, there was a handful of posters that actually clued viewers into the vibes of the season. The key poster is the best example of that, featuring a woman dressed in colonial clothes with jewelry and nails made of teeth. That one's gotta be my favorite from Roanoke, but the chimney one and the spider one are also close runners-up. Unlike Roanoke, Colt's marketing campaign would actually be entirely referential to the season at hand, with the season's key poster featuring a clown with an exposed beehive brain. With this bright yellow color scheme and similarly high contrast posters, it seemed like the team was going back to basics, utilizing similar visual strategies from seasons like Asylum or Murder House. And it really pays off because Colt's posters are some of my all-time favorites. The blue lady with the beehive eyeballs and the blindfolded clowns are tied for my favorite posters from Colt. The next season, Apocalypse, of course, would be the crossover between Murder House and Coven, and thus the marketing campaign harkened back to that of Murder House, this time featuring a similar red and black color scheme, only this time it centered around a very shiny red Antichrist baby. Interestingly, additional Apocalypse posters featured a completely different purple color scheme, and while they all are serving something completely different, they're vaguely witchy and apocalyptic. The lack of cohesion in Apocalypse marketing campaign strikes me as a bit odd, and the result is a bunch of posters that I have no strong feelings for. They're definitely not awful, but none of them have that instantly iconic quality that so many other posters from AHS have. If I were to choose a favorite Apocalypse poster though, it would be the one with the hourglass. 1984's posters were much more stripped back, mostly only featuring women being pursued by a masked killer. They are simple, but most of them are effective. The most obvious standout for me is the key poster. Season 8 and Season 9's marketing campaign feel like a slight drop-off when compared to Season 7 and all that came before it, but an even more noticeable drop-off happens right after Season 9, as at the time, Double Feature was responsible for my least favorite marketing campaign that AHS has ever done. That being said, the posters are eye-catching, so I'll definitely give it that, but to me these posters are just overwhelmingly ugly, and they don't do a great job of reflecting the actual seasons that Double Feature had. There is one poster though that I feel does no wrong, and it is this skull poster for specifically Red Tide. Frankly, I wish it could have been the key poster for the season because it's just better than any of the rest. There is also a Death Valley counterpart to this image, but it is nowhere near as good, but at least Double Feature's posters were ambitious. NYC NYC, on the other hand, I cannot say the same for. The similar composition, the muted color scheme, and the lack of horror in the NYC posters just feels out of place when you line it up with the ones from the rest of the show. And notably, the posters are also missing that high concept, something that both hooks the viewer and is easy for them to understand. So if you put this poster on a billboard, people might stop and look at it, but there's a good chance that none of them would have a clue what the season is even about. Compare this to Asylum, Coven, Freak Show, or even Double Feature, and you know exactly what those seasons are going to give. I can't even choose a favorite from NYC's actual promotional campaign, so instead I'm going to choose the character posters that were released for the season, as their orange color scheme and overall tone and costumes does a way better job at communicating what actually happened in the season. And that brings us to the latest season, Delicate, which compared to NYC definitely took a step in the right direction with a consistent red and blue color scheme that features some of the season's main cast members. Compared to the earlier seasons though, Delicate still does not hold a candle. The AHS marketing campaigns have had their ups and downs, but at least in my opinion, there was a steep decline around season 8, and while they've had their hits and misses since then, no poster after season 7 has reached the heights of all the ones that came before season 7. For the most part, the creative teams behind the marketing campaigns has remained consistent over the years, with photographer Frank Ockenfels photographing every single one of the posters we just talked about. And while there is less concrete information on like creative directors and things like that, to me it seems like a fairly consistent marketing team at FX that has been behind all of these campaigns. One thing we do know is that there was a lot of changes behind the scenes around the time of the Disney-Fox merger, so my best guess is that FX shows, including AHS, may have gotten a cut in their marketing campaign, which was around 2018, and that may explain the less ambitious and less effective posters and marketing campaigns we've had in recent years. It'll be interesting to see if season 13 will take a similar approach as Delicate by featuring some of its main cast members in the key posters, or if it will have a more traditional AHS marketing campaign.
I'd like to thank Skyler for taking the time to participate in this video. If you haven't seen his 3-hour documentary on American Horror Story Cult, please go check that out. I have it down in the description. The brownish red walls are a representation of the fact that the house is a hellmouth for spirits. It's what gives the season its red color. By the way, I kind of sort seasons into color categories because that's just how my brain works, and Murder House has always been like a dark brownish red for me because of this. Red can also be seen in a lot of the hair colors for some of the characters. Vivian has red hair and she's one of the main focuses of the season. There's also the fact that Ben is frequently hit on or otherwise seduced by women almost exclusively with red hair as well, which I find very interesting. Moira is the obvious example, but there's also Hayden, who has a faint strawberry blonde tint to her hair. When you compare Moira's fire truck red hair to Vivian's much more natural ginger, it sort of paints Ben's lust for Moira as a lust for a less weathered, faded version of his wife. At least that's how I see it. I may be reaching here with this theory since Hayden's hair is much more of a muted strawberry blonde as well, but I think it could represent the fact that Hayden's relationship with Ben is a lot more romantic in nature than his purely sexual encounters he has with Moira. Ben definitely felt something for Hayden. She was literally pregnant with his child, and he went to emotionally support her during her abortion. After she was killed, he mourned her death as if he had lost a loved one. So maybe her less vibrant red hair represents her more romantic relationship with Ben. There's also the birth scene in episode 11, which is completely color graded to be this dark, unholy red color. A red color that welcomes the birth of the literal Antichrist. The monochromatic color palette in Asylum correlates with its very dark tone. It's not just desaturated for the sake of being desaturated. There is a reason. There are countless shots of these patients in their cells staring into the void as they've started to lose all hope. It wouldn't make sense at all for this season to showcase the bright red color that Murder House so frequently did. The most color we see during this season happens outside of the asylum, like in the cozy Pizer Winters house in the first couple of episodes. We don't see too many other colors until Lana escapes with Thredson in episode 5. After being bathed in really unflattering lighting and gray tones in the asylum, Lana is yet again bathed in warm, welcoming colors while in Thredson's house. This represents his welcoming, trustworthy aura, at least at first glance. She starts to get a little bit more of an uncomfortable feeling about Oliver, so she heads for the bathroom and stumbles into this harsh, kind of cool-toned yellow room before he discovers her. This is where she finally finds out that she has stumbled into the house of Bloodyface. After this, he pulls a lever and sends her down into his basement, which has completely abandoned the warm tones and shifts completely to this cold, stark bluish green, making for an unnatural and unwelcoming feeling that goes along with Lana's descent into her personal hell. She has finally escaped the monochrome, depressing walls of her previous captor, that being the asylum, and has stumbled into a completely new, dark, lonely, desolate basement of the real Bloodyface. Episode 11 showcases another return to the colorful side of the season as Lana has finally escaped from Briarcliff. As she catches Thredson in a hurry to skip town, the room is lit by the contrasting reds and blues of the police siren. It's an incredibly cool scene just on its own, and I really recommend watching it because it really finalizes their arcs together. Coven's architecture might be mostly black and white, but its lighting provides all the color the season needs. Take this shot of Marie Laveau, which is fucking gorgeous by the way. I just love these contrasting colors on either side of her face. They are used here to showcase her dominance and power over Delphine, who is now her prisoner. The third season of AHS doesn't actually have that much color, but when it does, it knows how to properly make those colors pop. Think of Madison's bright red dress during the Sacred Taking. This represents her youthfulness when compared to Fiona, who is wearing an almost black nightgown, showcasing the fact that Fiona is quote-unquote old and washed up when compared to Madison. Freak Show is full of color. Nearly every single shot has at least 5 or 6 completely different colors. The oversaturation of bright pastels are used in service of Freak Show's Carney theme. I genuinely don't think we will ever see a season after this one use its colors so effectively. The green mist motif that Edward Mordrake rides into town with is iconic. Just about everyone in the cast has these really bright, colorful costumes that I absolutely love. Take Dandy and Gloria, for example, who almost exclusively wear these bright, flamboyant colors to flaunt their wealth. Freak Show's colors aren't really used to convey a message as far as I can tell. Most characters wear a variety of them to saturate as much as possible in order to fit the theme of the season, which is just as good of a reason as any. Hotel is known for its bright neon signs and use of a lot of red. From the vampires to the serial killers, this might be the bloodiest season of the show aside from 1984 maybe. However, the saturation here is turned all the way up, so it's so much more effective. The hotel itself has these brownish tan walls, which gives the setting an overall dirty and dry atmosphere that I actually kind of like in this instance. In some of the later seasons like Cult and Apocalypse, the costume designers, set designers, and editors decided to opt for a less conceptualized use of color in favor of realism, which is a choice I personally dislike, as I've stated before. Instead, they've started to experiment with these ugly filters. Look at this unedited clip I just grabbed from Cult. Why is it so beige and yellow? Where are the true blacks? Compare it to a season like Asylum, which barely had any color itself, and notice how the image sort of pops because of its contrast between lights and darks. Roanoke, Cult, Apocalypse, and even 1984 to some extent have very little contrast. The colors sort of blend together most of the time, and it's really, really difficult to decipher why they did this. Apocalypse has this really ugly orange filter in its first few episodes that I just cannot get over. Why did they color it like this? It's so ugly. There's a difference between using lighting and physical filters colors placed on the camera in order to achieve certain color variations, and just slapping a muddy filter on your footage. Just look how this scene from Coven, which is shot in this uncomfortable and anxious green, looks infinitely better than this scene from Apocalypse, which is colored in post to be a very similar bluish green. And tell me which one you think looks better. One of them probably uses a mixture of lighting and in-camera filters, and the other is most definitely edited in post. I can't think of one reason why they did this, but to me, it's just really ugly every time they use it. The lack of color in double feature really kind of annoys me as well, because the camera work has improved significantly from the last few seasons. Particularly in Red Tide, I don't really see that much color, and I don't know if I like that choice or not. It makes sense for the season because the season is set in Provincetown, which is a really gloomy kind of location in the winter anyway, so having desaturated colors makes sense, as it also allows for the red lights and blood to stand out, but I'm still not really sure if I like the choice overall. As for Death Valley, there's not much to be said that I haven't already. At this point, I'm not really surprised that the creators lost the ability to saturate their own show using creative costumes, lighting, and sets. Again, I've basically said everything I needed to say about Delicate as far as the coloring goes. Every single piece of furniture, and every single wall, and every single piece of clothing is either brown, gray, black, or white. There is hardly anything that differs from those colors and shades. I just wish that they would actually try to give these characters some traits to then build off of with creative color schemes for each one, but no, we're stuck with this. The main point I'm trying to make with this video is not that American Horror Story is just bad now. I liked the visual approach to seasons like 1984, Red Tide, and NYC. Like, it's not all bad now. There are definitely standouts and ones that stand out for bad reasons, such as Delicate. The point I am trying to make in this video is that good visuals matter in television, and a lot of TV shows nowadays just seem to phone it in. And I'm not talking about every TV show nowadays either, because shows like Euphoria, Stranger Things, and even Squid Game have been praised for their very iconic styles. But on the cable side of things, like American Horror Story, there's been a huge decline in the way TV shows have looked over the last 20 years. If you ask me, it all comes down to the fast foodification, if you will, when it comes to television now. It has been like commodified almost, to the point where, I mean, it was always commodified. Let's just be honest here. It's a product. But it feels as if, especially since Netflix came around, the great shows, the Stranger Things, the Euphorias, the Squid Games, for example, because I already used those three, are so few and far between that everything else is just so mid in the way that it's written, the way that it's acted, the way that it is produced, the way that it looks, everything. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think American Horror Story never lost its style, or maybe you thought it updated its style. Everyone has their own opinion. It's not necessarily due to the switch from film to digital, but it's more like the creatives nowadays attached to American Horror Story are just not the same as the creatives that were attached to it 10 years ago. Across the board, the entire creative team, other than Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, although they're not even technically writing any more episodes of the show at this point, so I guess that is true. Basically, every creative person that was a part of American Horror Story in the first few seasons has been replaced with someone else. That's the main problem. That's the main thing I'm getting to with this video. American Horror Story will always be iconic. There is no denying that. But saying its legacy hasn't been just a bit tainted in the last few years is also a bit of a lie. I don't know though. I'm not super passionate about it.